Welcome to Calm Art Studio. This is a place for slow stories, gentle voices, and unhurried art. You don't need to concentrate. You don't need to remember details. You can simply listen or let your thoughts drift or allow yourself to fall asleep. In this series, we're exploring the life story of Vincent van Gogh, not as a dramatic legend, but as a quiet human journey. A story of searching, of struggle, of beauty found in unexpected places, and of art created not for fame, but for meaning. Tonight's chapter is part of that longer story. Find a comfortable position, take a slow breath, and let the story unfold at its own pace. The story begins not with paintings or recognition, but in a small Dutch village, where a sensitive child learned to observe the world in silence. Zundert, a place of flat, open fields and vast skies, was the kind of countryside where time moved slowly, where light shifted gently to cross farmland, where wind whispered through wheat. It was quiet there, rural, the sort of place where a thoughtful child could spend long afternoons simply watching, the way shadows stretched across furrows, the way clouds drifted overhead, the way seasons changed the color of everything. This early immersion in the rhythms of nature, this patient observation, would become the foundation of Vincent van Gogh's art, though years would pass before he ever held a brush. In 1853, a child was born into this quiet world. His name was Vincent van Gogh. The year itself was unremarkable in the way that most years are. There were no great upheavals in Zundert, no sudden changes to the landscape or the way people lived. Life continued as it had for generations. Farmers worked the land, families gathered in modest homes, and in the center of the village stood a small church, simple and solid, where people came to worship, to mark the passages of their lives, to remember. Vincent's father was a minister. His name was Theodorus van Gogh. He served the Dutch Reformed Church, and his work was quiet work, the kind that unfolds in small moments. A sermon on Sunday, a visit to a family in need, words spoken at a graveside. Theodorus was steady, dutiful, a man who carried his faith into the everyday details of village life. He was not a man of great ambition or public acclaim. He was simply present, doing what was asked of him, year after year. Vincent's mother was named Anna Cornelia Carbentus. She had a love for the natural world that showed itself in small, gentle ways. She kept a garden. She noticed the way light fell across leaves in the afternoon. She liked to draw, though not in any formal or studied manner. It was simply something she enjoyed, a quiet pleasure she carried with her. She moved through her days with an attentiveness to beauty that did not need to announce itself. This was the household Vincent was born into. A minister's home, a mother who noticed flowers, a village that changed slowly, if it changed at all. But there was something else. Something that lived quietly in the background of Vincent's early life, mentioned rarely, but never entirely absent. 1 year before Vincent was born, another child had been born to Theodorus and Anna Cornelia, another son. He, too, had been named Vincent, but that first Vincent did not live. He was stillborn, and so exactly 1 year later, when a second son arrived, healthy and breathing, they gave him the same name, Vincent van Gogh. It was not an unusual practice. Families did this. A name could be passed down, tried again, given a second chance. And so the name remained. Vincent. The same name, the same family, the same small house in Zundert. Near the church where Theodorus preached, there was a grave, a small marker in the churchyard. It bore the name Vincent van Gogh and the date of his brief existence. The child who had not lived, the brother who had come before. Vincent would have walked past that grave many times. On Sundays, perhaps on the way to service, or on quiet afternoons when the churchyard was empty and still. It was there, a part of the landscape of his childhood, as familiar as the fields, the sky, the sound of the church bells ringing out over the village. There is no record of how he felt about it. No letter written in boyhood explaining what it meant to carry the name of someone who had not lived. But the grave was there, and Vincent was there, and the name belonged to both of them. Zundert itself was a place of wide horizons, the kind of place where the weather was always visible, always approaching or retreating. Clouds gathered slowly in the west and moved across the fields. Rain came in the spring and softened the earth. In summer, the light lasted long into the evening and the air smelled of grass and warm soil. Autumn brought changes in color, gold and rust spreading across the farmland. Winter was cold and gray, and the skies hung low. It was not a dramatic landscape. There were no mountains, no great rivers, no forests that stretched for miles. Just fields, just sky, just the turning of days into seasons. Vincent grew up in this. He knew the roads that connected the farms. He knew the rhythm of the church calendar, the cycle of planting and harvest, the way the village gathered and dispersed. He was one child among the others, walking the same paths, breathing the same air. Vincent van Gogh's mother's love of nature may have shaped him in small ways. Perhaps she pointed out the way a bird built its nest. Perhaps she let him help in the garden, his small hands learning the feel of soil and roots. Perhaps she showed him her drawings, simple sketches of flowers or trees, nothing grand, just quiet observations of the world around her. And perhaps his father's faith left an impression too, not in words, necessarily, but in the steady presence of ritual, Sunday mornings, prayers before meals, the sense that life had a shape, a meaning, even if that meaning was not always easy to name. Vincent was the eldest living child now. There would be other siblings in time, but for now he was the first, the one who carried the name forward, the one who walked past the grave on the way to church and did not yet know what any of it would mean. The days in Zundert moved slowly. Time did not rush forward. Childhood unfolded in the way it does when there is space and quiet. Seasons came and went. The fields turned green, then gold, then bare. The sky changed. The light changed. And Vincent was there, watching, growing, learning the contours of the world he had been born into. There was no sense then of what would come, no hint of the life that lay ahead. Just a boy, just a village, just the slow, steady turning of ordinary days, and for now, that was enough. As Vincent grew, the house in Zundert began to fill with the sounds and movements of other children. He was no longer alone. Siblings arrived, one after another, each adding their own presence to the family. There were brothers and sisters now, voices at the table, small feet on the floors, the kind of noise that comes with a household that is alive and full. Vincent was the eldest, the first living child, and in some ways, that position shaped him. He was the one who had come before the others, the one who watched as the family expanded around him, the one who perhaps carried a little more weight, a little more expectation, though no one may have said so out loud. Among all the siblings, there was one who would come to matter most, a younger brother, born 4 years after Vincent. His name was Theo van Gogh. In those early years, he was simply another child in the house, a little boy who followed where Vincent led, who shared the same rooms, the same meals, the same village. They were brothers as brothers are, but the depth of what would grow between them had not yet revealed itself. That would come later. For now, they were just two boys, living side by side in a minister's home in a quiet Dutch village. As Vincent grew, the house in Zundert began to fill with the sounds and movements of other children. He was no longer alone. Siblings arrived, one after another, each adding their own presence to the family. There were brothers and sisters now, voices at the table, small feet on the floors, the kind of noise that comes with a household that is alive and full. Vincent was not like the other children. This became clear early, not in any way that could be easily defined, but in the small, accumulating moments of childhood. The way he held himself, the way he moved through the world. There was a seriousness to him, a quality of thoughtfulness that set him apart. He did not laugh as easily as some children did. He did not join games with the same lightheartedness. He seemed to be watching, always watching, as if he were trying to understand something just beyond reach. His mind turned inward often. He felt things deeply, too deeply, perhaps, for a child. Other children noticed. Children always do. They sense when someone does not quite fit, when someone moves to a different rhythm. And Vincent did not fit. He struggled to make friends. Conversations did not come easily to him. The casual back and forth of childhood friendships, the unspoken rules of play and teasing and belonging, all of it felt foreign to him. He tried, perhaps, but trying was not the same as belonging. And so he began to spend more time alone, not because he wanted to be alone, necessarily, but because it felt easier, less complicated, less exhausting. He walked. That became his refuge. Long walks through the countryside around Zundert, where the fields stretched wide and the sky opened above him. Out there, he did not have to explain himself. He did not have to fit in. He could simply be. He walked the dirt roads that connected the farms. He crossed through fields of wheat and rye, watching the way the stalks swayed in the wind. He followed the edges of canals, where the water reflected the clouds, and the light changed from hour to hour. He walked in all seasons. In spring, when the earth was soft and new. In summer, when the heat pressed down and insects hummed in the grass. In autumn, when the colors shifted and the air turned cool. In winter, when the fields were bare and the sky hung low and gray. Nature became his companion, not in any mystical sense, but in the simple, steady presence it offered. The trees did not judge him. The fields did not ask him to be different. The sky was vast and indifferent and somehow comforting in its constancy. He'd observed everything. The way light fell across a field in late afternoon. The shape of a tree standing alone against the horizon. The patterns of clouds gathering before rain. He noticed details that other children might have walked past without a second thought. He paid attention. His mother had taught him to notice, perhaps, or perhaps it was simply who he was. Some people move through the world and see only what they need to see. Others cannot help but absorb everything, every small shift in color or shadow, every movement of wind or water. Vincent was the latter. He saw, and he felt, and sometimes the feeling was too much. He was sensitive, emotionally sensitive in a way that made life harder for him. He took things to heart. A harsh word could linger with him for days. A sense of rejection, real or imagined, could weigh on him. He did not have the armor that other children seemed to develop naturally, the ability to brush things off, to move on without looking back. Everything stayed with him. His parents may have worried about him. Theodorus, steady and dutiful, who understood faith and duty but perhaps did not understand this quiet, complicated son. Anna Cornelia, who loved nature and drawing, who perhaps saw something of herself in Vincent but could not quite reach him. They were good parents. By all accounts, they provided for their children. They cared, but understanding is not the same as caring, and Vincent may have felt the gap, even if he could not name it. His education was fragmented. He attended school, but not in any consistent way. There were changes, different schools, different teachers, different towns even. The reasons are not entirely clear. Perhaps his parents thought a change of environment would help him. Perhaps they hoped a different school would unlock something in him, help him connect, help him thrive. But the changes only added to the sense of dislocation. Each new school meant new faces, new expectations, new attempts to fit in that never quite succeeded. Vincent carried his seriousness with him wherever he went. He carried his sensitivity, and so the struggles continued. He was not a poor student, necessarily. He was capable. He learned what was taught, but he did not excel in the way that might have brought praise or recognition. He did not shine. He simply moved through his lessons, doing what was required, but never quite finding a place where he felt at home. The pattern repeated itself. A school, a stretch of time, another change. And through it all, the walks continued. The long, solitary walks through the countryside, where Vincent could breathe, where he could think, where he did not have to be anyone other than himself. There is a kind of loneliness that lives inside a person even when they are surrounded by others. Vincent knew that loneliness. He grew up with it. Not because he was unloved, but because he was different. And being different, especially as a child, is its own kind of isolation. He had siblings around him. He had a home, a family, a village. But inside, he felt separate. He felt as though he were watching life from a distance, unable to fully enter it, unable to find the key that would let him belong. Theo was there, growing up alongside him. But Theo was younger, still finding his own way. The bond that would later define both of their lives had not yet formed. For now, Theo was just a little brother, present but not yet essential. Vincent continued to walk. He continued to observe. He continued to feel everything, perhaps more than he wanted to. The seasons changed around him. The fields turned green and golden bare. The sky shifted from blue to gray to blue again, and Vincent walked through it all. A serious boy with a sensitive heart, trying to make sense of a world that did not quite make sense to him. He did not know then what any of it meant. He did not know where his life was heading, or what he was meant to do, or why he felt the things he felt. He only knew that he was different, that he did not fit, that the world asked things of him that he could not easily give. And so he kept walking, kept watching, kept feeling, not because he had chosen this path, but because it was the only path he knew how to walk. The years of childhood moved forward, slow and uneven. There were moments of quiet, moments of confusion, moments when Vincent stood in a field and watched the light change and felt something he could not name. Not peace, exactly, not happiness, but something, a sense of connection perhaps to the land itself, to the sky, to the turning of seasons that continued regardless of whether he understood his place in the world. He was just a boy who felt too much, a boy who walked alone, a boy who did not yet know where he belonged, and the days continued, one after another, carrying him forward into a future he could not yet see. When Vincent was 16, his childhood in Zundert came to an end. It was time for him to step into the world beyond the village, to find work, to begin the process of becoming whatever he was meant to become. His family had connections, as families often do, and those connections opened a door. There was an art dealership, a respected firm called Goupil and Sy. They dealt in paintings and prints, in reproductions of famous works, in the business of art as commerce. Vincent's uncle worked in this world, and through that connection, a position was arranged. Vincent would join the firm. He would learn the trade. He would have a profession. And so he left. He left the fields and the quiet roads of Zundert. He left his parents' house, his siblings, the churchyard where the first Vincent lay buried. He traveled to The Hague, a real city, with streets and buildings and the hum of business and life moving at a faster pace than anything he had known. The Hague was not large by the standards of European cities, but to Vincent, it must have felt vast. There were galleries and shops and people everywhere moving with purpose, going about their days. Vincent took his place among them. He wore a suit. He went to the office. He learned to speak with customers, to discuss paintings, to handle transactions, to be professional. At first, he managed. He was diligent. He showed up. He did what was asked of him. He had always been capable when he put his mind to something, even if he had never quite found his place. Here there were clear expectations. There was structure, and structure, for a while, was enough. He looked at art every day, paintings by Dutch masters, French landscapes, reproductions of works that hung in museums across Europe. He saw how people valued these things, how they spoke about them, how they exchanged money for images of beauty or significance. It was not the same as standing in a field and watching the light change, but it was something. It was a way of being close to art, even if he was on the outside of it, handling it as a merchant rather than engaging with it as something deeper. For a time, this was his life. The Hague, the gallery, the routine of work. He lived in a room somewhere in the city, ate his meals, walked the streets when the day was done. He wrote letters home, dutiful letters, the kind a son writes to reassure his parents that he is managing, that everything is fine. But something was shifting inside him. It was gradual, not sudden, a slow pulling away from the surface of things, a retreat inward that he could not quite control. The work began to feel hollow. The conversations with customers felt false. He was selling images of the world, but the real world itself, the real world of light and fields and sky, felt further away than ever. Vincent became quieter, more withdrawn. He did his work, but without the diligence he had shown at first. His mind was elsewhere. He was still physically present, behind the counter, in the gallery, but some essential part of him had stepped back, was standing at a distance, watching and wondering what any of it meant. His supervisors noticed. They must have. A young man who had once been capable was now drifting. His performance was slipping, but no one knew how to reach him, or perhaps no one tried. He was just another employee, after all, and if he could not do the work, there were others who could. Eventually, Vincent was transferred. The firm sent him to London. A change of scenery, perhaps. A new opportunity. A chance to start fresh. London was different from The Hague. Larger. Busier. The language was not his own, though he had learned English and could manage. He found lodging with a family, a widow and her daughter, who rented out rooms to young men like him. He went to work at the London branch of Goupil and Sy. He walked the city streets. He saw the Thames, the bridges, the crowds. For a while, it seemed possible that this might work. A new city, a new beginning. But Vincent carried himself with him, and the same patterns began to emerge. He was lonely, deeply lonely. London was full of people, but he felt alone among them. He did not make friends easily. He did not know how to bridge the gap between himself and others. He went to work, came home, sat in his room. The days repeated themselves. And then something happened that broke through the routine. He fell in love, or thought he did. It is hard to say what love is when you were young and lonely and desperate for connection. But whatever it was, Vincent felt it. The woman was the daughter of his landlady, Uge tilde copyright nigh. She was there, in the house where he lived, part of the daily fabric of his life. He saw her in the mornings, in the evenings. They spoke, perhaps. Small exchanges, normal, everyday interactions. But for Vincent, it became something more. He began to hope. Hope is a fragile thing when it is built on loneliness. Vincent allowed himself to imagine a future, a life that included someone else, a life where he was not alone. He convinced himself that she felt the same, that there was something between them, that if he only spoke, if he only expressed what he felt, she would understand. She would see him. She would say yes. He told her. At some point, he found the courage or the desperation to speak. He confessed his feelings. He offered himself, awkward and earnest and full of longing. She said no. She was already engaged to someone else. She had been engaged, perhaps, all along. Vincent had not seen it, or had not allowed himself to see it. His hope had blinded him to the reality of the situation. And now the reality stood before him, undeniable. She did not love him. She did not want him. She had her own life, her own plans, and Vincent was not part of them. The rejection cut deep, deeper than it might have for someone else, someone with a thicker skin, someone who could absorb the pain and move on. But Vincent felt everything. The humiliation, the loss, the confirmation of what he had always suspected, that he was not like other people, that he did not know how to belong. That love was something that happened to others, but not to him. He withdrew further. The world became gray. Work, which had already felt hollow, now felt unbearable. He went through the motions, but his heart was not in it. He could not bring himself to care about selling paintings, about discussing art with customers who did not really see what they were looking at. It all seemed pointless. His supervisors grew impatient. His performance had declined too far. He was no longer reliable. He was distant, distracted, sometimes openly dismissive of the work itself. This was a business, and Vincent was no longer conducting himself as a businessman should. They transferred him again, this time to Paris. Perhaps they hoped the move would shake him out of whatever had taken hold of him. Paris was the center of the art world, vibrant and alive. Surely that would inspire him, would remind him why he had entered this profession in the first place. But Paris did not help. If anything, it made things worse. The city was too much, too loud, too fast, too full. Vincent felt overwhelmed by it. He moved through the streets like a ghost, present but not really there. He went to work, but he was merely occupying space. His mind was elsewhere, lost in questions that had no easy answers. What was the point of all this? The buying and selling of art, the reduction of beauty to commerce, the pretense that any of it mattered. He could not shake the feeling that he was wasting his time, that his life was slipping away in a series of meaningless transactions. He grew more difficult. He argued with customers. He questioned the value of what they were selling. He could not hide his disillusionment, and he did not try. He was honest in a way that was inconvenient, uncomfortable. Honesty, in the world of business, is not always welcome. The firm had been patient, but patience has limits. Vincent was no longer an asset. He was a problem. And so, eventually, the decision was made. He was dismissed, let go, told that his services were no longer needed. He was 23 years old. He had spent 7 years with Goupil and Sy, moving from city to city, trying to make it work. And now it was over. He had failed, not through lack of effort, necessarily, but through some fundamental inability to align himself with the expectations of the world he had entered. He was adrift now, no job, no clear path forward, no sense of what came next. The structure that had held him however tenuously, was gone. He stood at the edge of something, but he did not know what it was. He thought about his life, about the years in The Hague and London and Paris, about the galleries and the paintings and the customers, about UG copyright NI and the rejection that still ached in some deep place inside him, about his family back in the Netherlands, who had hoped he would make something of himself, who had believed that the position at Goupil and Sai was the beginning of a stable, respectable life. He had disappointed them. He had disappointed himself. He did not know who he was or what he was meant to do. He only knew that something was missing, some essential connection to the world, to other people, to meaning itself. He walked the streets of Paris, as he had walked the fields of Zundert years before, alone, observing, feeling too much and understanding too little. The city moved around him, indifferent to his struggles. Life continued, people went about their business, and Vincent stood still, trying to figure out what to do with the weight he carried. He did not have answers, not yet. He only had questions, and the questions were heavy and persistent and impossible to ignore. So he kept walking, kept thinking, kept searching for something he could not name. The loss of his job was not just a practical problem. It was a deeper kind of loss, a loss of stability, yes, but also a loss of illusion. The illusion that he could fit into the world as it was, the illusion that he could be like other people, doing what they did, wanting what they wanted. That illusion was gone now, and in its absence, there was only uncertainty, only the long, difficult process of trying to find another way. The days passed, the city hummed with life, and Vincent, alone in the crowd, continued to search. After Paris, after the dismissal from Goupil and Sai, Vincent stood at a crossroads. He had no profession now, no clear direction. The years he had spent in the art world had ended in failure, and he did not know what else he was equipped to do. He felt lost, unmoored. The structure that had held his life together, however loosely, was gone, and into the emptiness something began to grow, a pull toward something deeper, something that had always been there, perhaps, in the background of his life. Faith. He had grown up in a minister's home. The rhythms of religious life had shaped his childhood. Sunday services, prayers at the table, the Bible read aloud in the evenings. His father, Theodorus, had lived his life in service to God, serving the small congregation in Zundert with quiet dedication. Vincent had seen that life up close. He had absorbed it, even if he had not yet understood what it meant to him. Now, in the aftermath of his failure, he began to turn toward it. Not casually, but with a sudden and overwhelming intensity. It was as if something had shifted inside him, as if all the longing and confusion and pain he had carried for years had found a focus. He believed he understood now. He believed he knew what he was meant to do. He was meant to serve. He was meant to follow in his father's footsteps. He was meant to bring comfort and hope to others through faith. This was his calling. This was what had been waiting for him all along. He threw himself into it completely. Vincent did not do anything halfway. When he committed to something, he committed with his entire being, and so it was with religion. He began to study the Bible with a fervor that bordered on obsession. He read it constantly. He memorized passages. He copied verses into notebooks, filling page after page with scripture. The words became his anchor, the thing he returned to again and again. He prayed, long, earnest prayers. He attended services whenever he could. He spoke to his father about theology, about doctrine, about what it meant to serve God and serve others. Theodorus must have been surprised by this sudden transformation. His quiet, troubled son was now ablaze with religious conviction. Vincent believed that if he devoted himself fully, if he studied hard enough, if he proved his sincerity, he could become a minister. He could stand in a pulpit as his father did. He could guide a congregation. He could offer solace to those who suffered. He could finally find a place where he belonged. But to become a minister required more than passion. It required education, formal training. There were institutions that prepared young men for the ministry, and Vincent would need to pass through them. He would need to study theology at a university level. He would need to pass entrance examinations. He would need to meet the academic standards that had been set. Vincent began to prepare. He returned to the Netherlands to his parents' home and he studied. He buried himself in books. Greek and Latin, the classical languages required for theological study. Mathematics, history, all the subjects he would be tested on. He worked with a tutor, a man named Menz da Costa, who tried to help Vincent master the material, but it was difficult. Vincent had never excelled in formal academic settings. He had always struggled with the rigid structure of schooling, the way it demanded that you learn in a particular order, at a particular pace, following rules that did not always make sense to him. And the languages were especially hard, Greek and Latin, ancient tongues with their own grammar, their own logic. Vincent tried. He spent hours at his desk, copying conjugations, memorizing vocabulary, working through translations. But the words would not stay in his mind, or they would stay, but in a jumbled way, not organized the way the exams required. His tutor was patient, but patience could only go so far. Vincent was struggling, and the more he struggled, the more frustrated he became. This was supposed to be his path. This was what he believed God wanted him to do. Why was it so hard? Why couldn't he simply learn what he needed to learn? The entrance exams came. Vincent took them, and he failed. It was not a close thing. He did not almost pass. He simply failed. The academic requirements were beyond him, or perhaps he was beyond them. Either way, the result was the same. The door to formal theological education was closed. But Vincent did not give up. His conviction had not wavered. If he could not become a minister through the traditional path, he would find another way. There had to be another way. His desire to serve was too strong to be stopped by an examination. He learned about another option, a shorter training program, less formal, designed for those who wanted to work as lay preachers or evangelists. It was not the same as becoming a fully ordained minister, but it was something. It was a way to do the work he felt called to do. Vincent applied. He was accepted. He threw himself into the training with the same intensity he had brought to his Bible study. He listened to lectures. He participated in discussions. He tried to absorb everything he was being taught about how to preach, how to lead a service, how to connect with people through faith. But once again, he struggled. The program had its own expectations, its own structure. There were ways things were supposed to be done, a certain tone to strike in sermons, a certain approach to take with congregations, and Vincent, as always, could not quite fit himself into the mold. He was too intense, too earnest. His sermons, when he practiced them, were not smooth or polished. They were raw, full of emotion, deeply personal. He did not speak the way the instructors wanted him to speak. He did not present himself the way they thought a preacher should present himself. He was too much. That was the problem. Too passionate, too serious, too strange. The same qualities that had made him struggle in the art world, that had isolated him as a child, were now working against him again. The instructors grew concerned. They questioned whether Vincent was suited for this work, not because he lacked faith. His faith was obvious, overwhelming even, but faith alone was not enough. You had to be able to communicate. You had to be able to meet people where they were. You had to be able to work within the structures of the church. Vincent tried to adjust. He tried to be what they wanted, but he could not silence the part of himself that felt everything too deeply, that could not pretend or perform or smooth over the rough edges. Eventually, the training program ended, and Vincent did not pass. Not officially. He was not deemed ready. He was not given the certification or approval he needed to work as a lay preacher in any official capacity. Another door had closed, another failure, another rejection, but still, his desire to serve did not fade. If anything, it grew stronger. He believed, with a conviction that nothing could shake, that he was meant to do this work. He was meant to bring comfort to those who suffered. He was meant to live a life of service and sacrifice. The institutions had rejected him, but God had not. He was certain of that, and so he decided he would do it anyway, with or without approval, with or without training. He would find a way. He heard about a place, a region in Belgium called the Borinage. It was a coal mining area, one of the poorest and most difficult places in Europe. The miners there lived in brutal conditions. They worked in darkness, deep underground, risking their lives every day for meager wages. Their families lived in poverty. Their children went hungry. It was a place of suffering. Vincent decided that was where he needed to go, not to a comfortable parish in a pleasant town, not to a congregation of respectable, well-fed people, but to the Borinage, to the miners, to the people who needed hope most desperately. He believed this was what Christ would have done. Christ had gone to the poor, the suffering, the outcasts. And so Vincent would do the same. He would bring the gospel to the miners. He would live among them. He would serve them however he could. It did not matter that he had no official position. It did not matter that the church had not endorsed him. He would go anyway. His conviction was stronger than any institution. His faith was his own and no one could take it from him. And so he prepared to leave, to go to Belgium, to step into a life of service, even if no one had asked him to, even if no one believed he was ready. The exams had defeated him, the training programs had rejected him, the structures he had tried to work within had all failed to accommodate him, but the structures did not matter anymore, not to Vincent. What mattered was the work itself. The calling, the belief that he had something to offer, some way to ease the suffering of others. He did not know what awaited him in the Borinage. He did not know if the miners would accept him, if his efforts would make any difference, if he could survive in a place so harsh and unforgiving. But he was going. He had decided, and once Vincent decided something, nothing could turn him away. His conviction remained, unshaken, undiminished. He would serve, he would give everything he had, and perhaps, in giving, he would finally find the sense of purpose that had eluded him for so long. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Vincent felt sure of his direction. He was moving toward something that mattered, something that might, at last, make sense of all the confusion and pain that had come before. He did not know yet that this path, too, would lead to heartbreak. He did not know that his time in the Borinage would test him in ways he could not imagine. He only knew that he had to go, that his faith demanded it, that the pull toward service was too strong to resist. And so he went, carrying his Bible, carrying his conviction, carrying the weight of all his failed attempts to find his place in the world, but still believing, still hoping, still certain that somewhere, somehow, there was a way for him to matter. The Borinage was not like anywhere Vincent had been before. It was a place carved out of hardship, a landscape shaped by labor and loss. The villages were small and gray, clustered around the coal mines that dominated everything. The mines were the center of life here. They provided work, meager as it was, and they took lives in return. Cave-ins, explosions, slow suffocation from the dust that filled the miners' lungs. Death was a constant presence. The people who lived here were poor in a way that Vincent had never witnessed firsthand. Not the gentle poverty of struggling families who still had a roof and regular meals, but a grinding, relentless poverty that wore people down to nothing. The miners worked long hours in darkness, deep beneath the earth, hauling coal in tunnels so narrow they had to crawl. They earned barely enough to survive. Their families lived in cramped, cold houses. Their children often went hungry. Sickness was common. Hope was rare. This was where Vincent came to preach. This was where he believed he was meant to be. He arrived with nothing but his Bible and his conviction. He found lodging in one of the mining villages, a simple room in a simple house. He began to hold services, small gatherings where he would read scripture and speak to whoever came. At first, the miners were wary. They did not know this strange, intense young man who had appeared among them. But Vincent was earnest. He was sincere, and slowly some of them began to listen. He did not preach like other ministers. He did not stand at a distance, offering comfort from a position of safety. He wanted to be among them, to live as they lived, to share in their struggles. He believed that was what faith demanded, that to truly serve, you had to give everything. And so he began to give. He gave away his money, what little he had. He gave away his clothes, keeping only the most threadbare garments for himself. When families had no food, he gave them his own. When someone needed a blanket, he offered his. When a miner was injured and had no one to care for him, Vincent sat with him, cleaned his wounds, prayed over him. He moved out of his lodging and into a small hut, barely more than a shed, with a dirt floor and walls that let in the cold. He slept on the ground. He ate almost nothing. He wore ragged clothes that hung loosely on his thinning frame. He wanted to live as the miners lived, to know what they knew, to feel what they felt. He did not preach like other ministers. He did not stand at a distance, offering comfort from a position of safety. He wanted to be among them, to live as they lived, to share in their struggles. He believed that was what faith demanded, that to truly serve, you had to give everything. And so he began to give. He gave away his money, what little he had. He gave away his clothes, keeping only the most threadbare garments for himself. When families had no food, he gave them his own. When someone needed a blanket, he offered his. When a miner was injured and had no one to care for him, Vincent sat with him, cleaned his wounds, prayed over him. He moved out of his lodging and into a small hut, barely more than a shed, with a dirt floor and walls that let in the cold. He slept on the ground. He ate almost nothing. He wore ragged clothes that hung loosely on his thinning frame. He wanted to live as the miners lived, to know what they knew, to feel what they felt. The people began to see him differently. This was not a preacher who came for a few hours and then returned to comfort. This was someone who had chosen to suffer with them. Some were moved by it. Some were confused. Some thought he had gone too far. Vincent visited the sick. He walked through the villages, going from house to house, offering whatever help he could. He descended into the mines, into the darkness and danger, to see the conditions where the men worked. He came back up covered in coal dust, coughing, shaken by what he had witnessed. But he went back down again. He wanted to understand. He wanted to know. He held services in the evenings, after the miners had finished their shifts. He spoke to them about suffering and redemption, about Christ's love for the poor, about the promise of something better beyond this life of pain. His sermons were raw and emotional. He did not have the polished delivery of a trained minister. He stumbled over words sometimes. His voice cracked with feeling, but there was a truth in what he said, a depth of conviction that came from his own suffering, his own struggles to find meaning. He gave and gave and gave. He poured himself out completely. He believed this was what it meant to follow Christ, to hold nothing back, to sacrifice everything for the sake of others. He was living his faith in the most literal way possible, and it consumed him. But not everyone saw it the way Vincent did. Word of his behavior reached the church authorities who oversaw the lay preachers in the region. They began to hear reports. A young preacher living in squalor, giving away everything he had, looking more like a beggar than a representative of the church, behaving in ways that seemed extreme, even fanatical. They came to see for themselves. Officials from the church, men in proper clothes with proper expectations about how a preacher should conduct himself. They found Vincent in his hut, thin and pale, dressed in rags, barely eating. They spoke with the miners and heard mixed opinions. Some praised Vincent's dedication. Others expressed concern. He was kind, yes, but he was also strange, intense, difficult to understand. The officials were troubled. This was not how a preacher should live. Yes, one should serve the poor, but not become indistinguishable from them. A preacher needed to maintain a certain dignity, a certain authority. How could people respect the church if its representative looked like he was starving to death? They spoke with Vincent. They told him he needed to take better care of himself, that his behavior was excessive, that he was doing more harm than good by living this way. He was making the church look foolish. He was undermining the work they were trying to do. Vincent did not understand, or perhaps he understood but could not accept it. He believed he was doing what Christ had done. Christ had lived among the poor. Christ had given everything. Why was he being criticized for following that example? Why was his sacrifice being called excessive? But the officials did not see it as sacrifice. They saw it as instability, as a kind of madness. Vincent was too much once again, too intense, too extreme. He could not find the balance they wanted, the middle ground between service and self-preservation. They made their decision. Vincent was dismissed. His position as a lay preacher was revoked. He was told he could no longer represent the church in any official capacity. They were done with him. Another rejection, another door closing, but this one hurt more than the others. This was not about failing an exam or struggling with academic requirements. This was about the very core of who he believed himself to be. He had given everything. He had lived his faith as fully as he knew how, and the church had looked at what he had done and said it was not enough, or worse, that it was wrong. Vincent was devastated. He stayed in the Borinage for a while longer, unsure of where else to go. He had no position now, no purpose. The thing he had believed was his calling had been taken from him. He wandered through the mining villages, lost and hollow. The miners still knew him. Some still greeted him, but he was no longer their preacher. He was just another lost soul in a place full of them. He felt the weight of failure pressing down on him again. Heavier this time. He had failed as an art dealer. He had failed at theological studies. And now he had failed at the one thing he had been most certain about, his faith, his calling to serve. What was left? What else was there? He did not know. He walked the grey roads between the villages. He looked at the mines, the slag heaps, the smoke rising from distant chimneys. He thought about the miners still working below ground, their lives continuing in the same brutal rhythm. He thought about the families still struggling to survive. And he thought about himself, and the fact that he could not help them anymore, that he had been deemed unfit. The rejection wounded him in a way that cut deeper than loneliness or romantic loss. This was a rejection of his very soul, of the most sincere part of himself. He had offered everything, and it had not been wanted. He sat in his small hut and stared at the dirt floor. He opened his Bible, but the words did not comfort him the way they once had. He prayed, but the prayers felt hollow, unanswered. He felt abandoned, not just by the church, but by something larger, by the God he had tried so desperately to serve. Days passed, weeks. Vincent remained in the Borinage, but he was no longer sure why. He had nowhere else to go, perhaps. Or maybe he was waiting for something, some sign, some indication of what he was supposed to do next. The conviction that had driven him, the certainty that had carried him through so much struggle, began to crack, not all at once but slowly, a quiet fracturing of the faith that had defined him. He still believed in some deep place, but the belief no longer felt like a clear path forward. It felt like a weight, a burden, a reminder of how he had failed. And in the silence that followed the dismissal, in the empty days of wondering and questioning, something inside Vincent began to shift. He did not recognize it at first. It was too subtle, too quiet, but it was there. A turning, a redirection of all the intensity and passion and need to give that had poured into his faith. He began to notice things again, the way the light fell across the mining villages at certain times of day, the faces of the miners, lined and weathered and full of stories, the shapes of the buildings, the textures of the landscape. The same observant eye that had watched the fields of Zundert in his childhood was awakening again. He did not know yet what it meant. He was still too wounded, too lost. But the shift had begun. The current that had carried him toward faith with such force was changing direction, pulling him toward something else, something he could not yet name. For now, he simply existed. He walked, he watched. He carried his pain quietly, as he had always done. The Borinage continued around him, indifferent to his suffering. The mines operated. The miners descended into darkness and returned. Life went on. And Vincent van Gogh, standing at the edge of everything he had believed about himself, waited in the silence for whatever came next. The weeks after his dismissal blurred together. Vincent remained in the Borinage, though he no longer had a reason to be there. He had no work, no position, no purpose that he could name. He moved through the days like someone half awake, going through the motions of survival without any sense of direction. He still lived in poverty, not because he was trying to prove anything anymore, but because he had nothing. The little money he had once received for his work as a lay preacher was gone. He relied on the kindness of the miners, who sometimes shared what little food they had. He was one of them now, not by choice as before, but by circumstance. Another poor soul in a poor place. The despair that had begun as a crack after his dismissal widened into something deeper. He felt hollow, empty. All the conviction that had driven him, all the certainty about his calling, had drained away. He had given everything to his faith, and his faith had not sustained him. Or perhaps it was the church that had failed him. Or perhaps he had failed himself. He did not know anymore. He spent long hours alone. He walked the same roads he had walked when he was still a preacher, but now the walks felt different. Before, they had been purposeful, part of his mission to serve. Now they were just walks, a way to fill time, a way to escape the silence of his own thoughts, though the thoughts followed him everywhere. He felt like a failure in every possible way. He had failed at being an art dealer. He had failed at becoming a minister. He had failed at living out his faith in a way the church could accept. Every path he had tried had led to rejection. Every door he had approached had closed in his face. He was 27 years old and he had accomplished nothing. He had no career, no family of his own, no future he could see. The isolation was crushing. He had always been alone, in one way or another, but this was different. This was not just loneliness. This was a complete severance from any sense of belonging. He did not fit in the church. He did not fit in the world of commerce. He did not even fit among the miners, who were kind to him, but who must have wondered what this strange, sad man was doing among them. He wrote letters to Theo during this time. His brother had remained in contact throughout all of Vincent's struggles. Theo was working now, following a more conventional path, building a career in the art world that Vincent had left behind. He was stable in a way Vincent had never been, and he was kind. He sent money when he could. He wrote back. He did not judge, or if he did, he kept it to himself. Vincent's letters to Theo were full of pain. He wrote about his despair, his sense of failure, his inability to find a place in the world. He wrote about feeling lost and broken. The letters were raw, difficult to read, but Theo read them, and he continued to write back. He continued to send what help he could. He did not abandon Vincent, even when it might have been easier to do so. In the depths of that despair, something began to happen. It was small at first, so small that Vincent might not have noticed it. But gradually, almost without thinking about it, he began to draw. He had drawn before, years ago, as a child, perhaps, watching his mother sketch flowers. During his time at Goupil and Sai, surrounded by art every day, but he had never taken it seriously. It had never been more than a passing interest, something he did occasionally but never pursued. Now, in the Borinage, with nothing else to occupy his time and no other outlet for everything he was feeling, he picked up a pencil. He found paper, cheap and rough, and he began to sketch the world around him. At first, it was just something to do, a way to pass the hours. He drew the miners, their faces weathered and tired, their hands calloused and scarred from years of hard labor. He drew the women who worked alongside them, hauling coal, carrying baskets, their bodies bent under the weight. He drew the children, thin and ragged, playing in the dirt between the houses. He drew the landscape, the mining villages with their simple, cramped buildings, the slag heaps rising like small mountains of waste, the flat, gray sky that seemed to press down on everything. He drew what he saw, not because he had any grand ambition, but because it was there. Because these people were there. Because their lives, as hard and as painful as they were, deserved to be seen. The drawings were not beautiful, not in any conventional sense. They were rough, awkward, the work of someone who did not yet know what he was doing. The proportions were sometimes wrong, the lines were uncertain, but there was something in them, something sincere. Vincent was trying to capture what he saw, not just the physical shapes, but the feeling of the place, the weight of it, the sorrow and the dignity that coexisted in these people's lives. He did not think of himself as an artist. That would have seemed absurd. Artists were trained, skilled, people who had studied at academies and learned the techniques. Vincent was just drawing, just putting pencil to paper, just trying to make sense of the world in the only way that felt available to him. But as he drew, something shifted, not suddenly, not dramatically, but in small, accumulating ways. The act of drawing gave him something, a way to channel the empathy he had always felt, the deep, overwhelming compassion for suffering that had driven him into the church in the first place. When he drew a miner's face, he had to look closely. He had to pay attention to the lines etched by years of labor, the expression that spoke of exhaustion and endurance. He had to see the person, really see them, and in that act of seeing, of translating what he observed onto paper, he was doing something. Not preaching, not offering spiritual comfort, but bearing witness, giving form to lives that might otherwise be invisible. It was another kind of service. He did not think of it that way at first, but slowly, quietly, the connection began to form in his mind. He had wanted to serve people through faith, and the church had rejected him. But maybe there were other ways to serve. Maybe art, humble and imperfect as his efforts were, could be a way to honor the dignity of people who suffered. A way to say, I see you, your life matters, your struggle is worth recording. He kept drawing, day after day, the miners, the workers, the landscape. He filled pages with sketches, most of them flawed, but all of them earnest. He was not trying to be great. He was not imagining a future where people would look at his work and find it valuable. He was simply drawing because it felt like the only thing that made sense anymore. Theo noticed. In his letters, Vincent began to mention the drawings. Tentatively at first, he sent a few sketches to his brother, not sure how they would be received. Theo encouraged him, gently. He did not make grand proclamations about Vincent's talent. He simply said that he thought Vincent should keep going, that there was something worthwhile in what he was doing. That encouragement mattered, more than Theo might have realized. Vincent had been rejected so many times, by so many institutions, that any affirmation, no matter how small, felt significant. Theo believed in him, or at least, Theo believed he should keep trying, and so Vincent did. Theo noticed. In his letters, Vincent began to mention the drawings. Tentatively at first, he sent a few sketches to his brother, not sure how they would be received. Theo encouraged him, gently. He did not make grand proclamations about Vincent's talent. He simply said that he thought Vincent should keep going, that there was something worthwhile in what he was doing. That encouragement mattered, more than Theo might have realized. Vincent had been rejected so many times, by so many institutions, that any affirmation, no matter how small, felt significant. Theo believed in him, or at least, Theo believed he should keep trying, and so Vincent did. He began to think about art more seriously, not as a hobby, but as something he might actually pursue. It was a frightening thought. He was 27. He had no training, no connections in the art world, not anymore. He had failed at everything else he had tried. Why would art be any different? But he could not stop. The drawings kept coming, and with each one he felt a little less lost. Not happy, not yet, but slightly more grounded. The pencil in his hand, the paper in front of him, the act of trying to capture what he saw, it gave him something to hold on to. He thought about the miners, about the time he had spent living among them, trying to ease their suffering through faith. He had failed at that, according to the church, but maybe he had not failed completely. Maybe the compassion he had felt for them, the desire to honor their lives, could find expression in another form, not through sermons, but through images, not through words about redemption, but through drawings that showed the truth of their existence. It was not greatness he was reaching for, not recognition or acclaim. It was something quieter, a way to make his empathy tangible, a way to serve without needing anyone's permission, a way to give, even when he had nothing else to give. The despair did not disappear. It lingered, a constant presence in the background of his thoughts. But the drawing created small pockets of relief, moments where he was absorbed in the work, focused on getting a line right, on capturing the curve of a shoulder or the shadow on a face, moments where he was not thinking about his failures or his uncertain future, just drawing. He did not know where this would lead. He did not have a plan, but for the first time since his dismissal, he had something that felt like a thread, thin and fragile but real, a direction, even if he could not see where it was going. He kept his pencil, he kept his paper, and he kept drawing. The miners, the workers, the quiet, suffering dignity of the Borinage, not because he thought he was creating art, but because he needed to, because it was the only way he knew to make sense of what he had seen and felt, because it was the only light he could find in the darkness that had settled over his life. And so, in the grey villages of a coal mining region in Belgium, surrounded by poverty and pain, Vincent van Gogh took his first uncertain steps toward becoming an artist, not with confidence, not with vision, but with empathy, and for now, that was enough. Vincent stood at the edge of his 20s, looking back on a trail of failure. Every path he had tried had led to disappointment. Every door he had approached with hope had closed. The art dealership had ended in dismissal. The pursuit of ministry had ended in rejection. Even his attempt to serve the poor in the most direct way possible had been deemed excessive, inappropriate, unacceptable. He had tried to find his place in the world. He had tried with sincerity, with intensity, with everything he had. And the world had told him, again and again, that he did not fit, that he was too much or not enough, that his way of being was somehow wrong. The weight of that accumulated rejection sat heavy on him. He carried it in his body, in the thinness of his frame, in the exhaustion that showed in his face. He carried it in his mind, in the persistent questions that had no answers. What was he meant to do? Where did he belong? Why did everything he touched seem to fall apart? He had left the Borinage eventually. There was nothing left for him there. The miners continued their work. The villages continued their struggle. And Vincent, no longer their preacher, no longer anything in particular, moved on. Not because he had somewhere specific to go, but because staying felt impossible. He drifted. He stayed with family when they would have him. He moved between places, never settling, never certain of what came next. The despair followed him. It was not the kind of despair that announces itself loudly. It was quiet, persistent, a gray fog that colored everything. He functioned. He woke up. He moved through his days. But there was no joy in it. No sense of purpose, just the weight of not knowing what he was supposed to do with his life. His relationship with his family was strained. They had tried to help him. They had supported him through various endeavors, hoping each time that this would be the thing that worked, that Vincent would finally find stability, but he had disappointed them, over and over, and while they did not abandon him, there was a weariness in their interactions, a sense that they did not know what to do with him either. His father, Theodorus, the minister who had served his congregation faithfully for so many years, must have looked at his son and wondered what had gone wrong. Here was a boy who had been given opportunities, who had been bright enough, capable enough, who had seemed, at various points, to be on the verge of finding his way, and yet nothing had worked. Vincent remained adrift, troubled, unable to settle into any form of adult life. His mother, Anna Cornelia, with her love of nature and her quiet observations, perhaps understood him better, but understanding did not mean she could fix what was broken. She could offer sympathy, but she could not give him the answers he needed. No one could. Only Theo seemed to maintain unwavering support. Theo, the younger brother, who had watched Vincent struggle through so many attempts, so many failures. Theo wrote letters. He sent money even when he did not have much himself. He encouraged Vincent to keep trying, to not give up. He did not judge. He did not offer solutions he did not have. He simply stood beside his brother, even from a distance, and said, "I am here. You are not alone." That support was a lifeline, perhaps the only one Vincent had. In his darkest moments, when the despair threatened to consume him completely, there was Theo, steady, constant, believing in something, even if Vincent could not see what it was. And there was the drawing, the quiet act of putting pencil to paper. It had started in the Borinage almost accidentally as a way to fill empty hours, but it had not stopped. Even as Vincent moved from place to place, even as he struggled with uncertainty about his future, the drawing continued. It was not a career, not yet. It was not something he could point to and say, "This is what I do. This is who I am." He was not skilled enough for that. He had no training, no formal education in art. His drawings were still rough, still searching, but they were becoming more frequent, more necessary. When he felt overwhelmed by his thoughts, he drew. When the weight of failure pressed down too hard, he drew. When he needed to do something, anything, that felt like it mattered, he drew. It was a refuge, a small space where he could control something, where he could make something exist that had not existed before. He drew people. Ordinary people, workers, peasants, faces marked by hardship, bodies shaped by labor. He was drawn to those who suffered, who struggled, who persevered despite everything, perhaps because he recognized something of himself in them, or perhaps because his deep concern for humanity, the same concern that had driven him toward ministry, had found a new outlet. He was not trying to make beautiful art. He was trying to bear witness, to say, "These people exist, their lives matter. Their dignity, even in poverty, even in pain, deserves to be seen." It was service of a different kind, not spiritual service, but something equally earnest, a way of honoring the people he had always felt connected to. The drawings were not successful in any external sense. No one was buying them, no one was praising them. He was not being recognized as an artist, but that was not why he was doing it. He was doing it because he had to, because it was the only thing that made sense. Because when he held a pencil and looked at a face and tried to capture it on paper, something in him felt aligned, not happy, not fulfilled, but aligned. His concern for humanity had not diminished. It had simply changed form. Where once he had tried to serve through faith, through preaching, through living in poverty alongside the poor, he was now trying to serve through observation, through attention, through the act of seeing and recording and honoring. It was not enough to ease his despair, not entirely, The questions remained. The uncertainty remained. The sense of being lost in a world that had no place for him remained, but the drawing gave him something to hold on to, a thread in the darkness, a small reason to keep going. He did not know if it would lead anywhere. He did not know if he would ever become skilled enough to call himself an artist. He did not know if anyone would ever care about the images he was creating. He only knew that he could not stop, that the act of drawing had become as necessary as breathing, and so he kept going, not with confidence, not with a clear vision of the future, but with the stubborn persistence that had carried him through everything else. He had failed at so many things. He had been rejected by so many institutions. He had disappointed so many people, including himself. But he was still here, still trying, still searching for something he could not yet name. The years behind him were marked by loss of direction, loss of faith, in some ways, loss of the certainty that had once made him throw himself into religion with such fervor. But the losses had not destroyed him. They had worn him down, yes. They had left him exhausted and uncertain. But they had not erased the core of who he was. He still felt deeply. He still cared about people who suffered. He still needed to give, to serve, to make some kind of contribution to the world. The forms had changed. The methods had changed. But the need remained. Art had entered his life quietly, not as a triumph, not as a revelation, but as a necessity, as the thing that showed up when everything else had fallen away. And perhaps that was the only way it could have happened. Perhaps Vincent needed to fail at everything else before he could turn fully toward the one thing that might, eventually, give shape to his life. He did not know that yet. He could not see it. He was too close to his own struggle, too immersed in the day-to-day difficulty of simply existing. He was a man still searching, a life still unfolding. Nothing was resolved, nothing was certain. But the pencil was in his hand, the paper was in front of him, and somewhere, in the act of drawing, in the quiet attention to the faces and forms of the world around him, something was beginning, something that would not reveal itself for years, something that would require more failure, more pain, more struggle before it could emerge fully. For now, Vincent was simply doing what he could, drawing, observing, trying to make sense of a life that had not gone the way he had hoped, trying to find a reason to continue when every reason he had been given had crumbled. He was 27 years old. He had accomplished nothing the world would recognize. He had no career, no family of his own, no clear future, just a deep, abiding concern for humanity, and a growing need to express that concern through images. The story was not over. It had barely begun. But this was where it started, not in triumph, not in revelation, but in failure, in despair, in the quiet act of picking up a pencil and trying again. A man still searching, a life still unfolding, and somewhere, in the darkness, the faintest beginning of light. As this quiet beginning fades, we move gently toward the moment when Vincent first turned to art, not as ambition, but as a way to keep going. You've reached the end of this chapter. Vincent van Gogh's life was not a single moment, but a long, unfolding story, shaped by quiet persistence, deep feeling, and the simple act of continuing. This is only one part of that journey. The story carries on in the next episode, where another chapter gently takes shape. If you're awake and would like to continue, the next part will be waiting for you. And if these calm stories bring you a sense of rest, you're welcome to subscribe to Calm Art Studio, so future chapters can find you when they're ready. For now, you can let the images fade softly into sleep. Thank you for spending this quiet time with Calm Art Studio. Rest well, and we'll continue the story soon.